listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from America and just outside the Matrix. It is time for a Friday edition. And the last time John Kiriakou is going to be the co-host of The Backstory. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan.
And I'm former CIA officer John Kiriakou.
And this is, in fact, The Backstory. Now, John is not in the studio today, and I must admit, John, I'm a bit flummoxed because with all the fancy video stuff that I got capable now, I haven't figured out how to deal with it when you're not in the studio. So I can't show up a picture. So instead, John, talk and say something. I'm going to do something for the video team. Go ahead.
Okay.
Just say something.
You know what? I was thinking about this today. It was what we didn't have time to talk about yesterday, and that was the death of the great Peter Bogdanovich. And today we have the death of the great Sidney Poitier. And, you know, if we have 5 minutes, we should talk about some really amazing movies that we saw from these guys' career.
We should. And what I was doing, John, was a hand puppet. I put my glasses on my hand.
I see you. I'm watching you on YouTube. It's a pretty good likeness of me.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Sorry. I was doing what I can. It's called improvising. We got more of that. We got a great show today, by the way. Dean O'Brien, photojournalist who's covered the Donbass situation and really international stuff in Eastern Europe. He'll be on in the first hour. In the second hour, we are privileged to have two VIPs with us, John.
Yeah.
Right? Not only
this
you.
This is going to be a lot of fun.
You're a VIP.
Oh,
you're part
not
of
me. Oh, a VIP.
You are.
I gotcha. I was thinking a very important person, but I'm not a very important person. But I am a member of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity.
That's right. And we'll also be having the irascible Ray McGovern. He's quite a character, among other things, right? Is that fair to say?
You know, Ray is one of the most good and honest and decent human beings I've ever known in my life. He's an American hero. He's a great champion of whistleblowers, proudly served his country for 30-plus years at the CIA, and has been a long-time truth teller. This is going to be fun.
And it seems like fun, too. The one time I talked, the first time I ever talked to him, I just kept laughing out loud because he would say, you know the way he talks. He's funny.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah,
among other
definitely.
things. And now completely we've lost video, and I don't know why. But we got more to the audience what they pay us for here on The Backstory. So let's talk about that. Yeah, Sidney Poitier died at the age of 94. And did you see the New York Times misspelled his name in their initial?
Oh my God! And they had to issue a correction. Like you have to think too. The guy's 94 years old. You know that they wrote this obituary, 20 years ago, and it's just been sitting in the file. They update it every year. You would have thought that over the last 20 years they would have gotten the spelling of his name correct.
They spelled it like Sidney Powell, right?
Yes, they did, and they had to issue a correction, which
like Sydney, Australia. Right? And so they had to issue a correction. But that's embarrassing. So I saw it early, and before they screwed up the spelling, I just put To Sir With Love, R.I.P., because that's a great song, and it was a great role for him. But a lot of people don't remember it necessarily. But they remember him from his other films, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, for instance.
Brilliant
and Lilies of the Field. Yes, and the film he won the Oscar for. His first Oscar. And
exactly.
I was,
he was the first black man to win an Oscar for Best Actor. It was quite a big deal when it happened.
It was. And like I say, we were talking a bit about race stuff yesterday. I think Sidney Poitier is a good example of what's missing, what's gone for some reason. The reason Sidney Poitier was well thought of was not because he's black.
No.
Right?
No, that's
because
correct.
he was a great actor.
He was a brilliant actor. Yeah, he was just a brilliant actor.
It wasn't a gimme. That's all I'm saying. The Oscar was not a gimme. And also just the sort of definition of class and dignity. I actually saw him in person one time. I was working at Universal. Yeah, when I was in my 20s, I mentioned this before, I worked as a temp in LA. And one of the places I worked was on lot at Universal Studios. And one day I looked over and there was Sidney Poitier, and looked every bit as distinguished. I don't know how else to put it. Now, Peter Bogdanovich, director and actor, did The Last Picture Show, was his breakthrough film. But also a lot of weird tragedy in his life, including the death of his girlfriend, Playboy model Dorothy Stratton. Go ahead, John.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, that was a major event in his life, as you might assume. And you know, the crazy thing is, well, he was directing a film that was starring Dorothy Stratton. I think it was called They All Laughed. It was a romantic comedy, and her estranged husband flew into a rage when he heard that Bogdanovich had begun dating Dorothy Stratton, and so he murdered her. And what ended up happening with Bogdanovich is he ended up marrying Dorothy Stratton's younger sister. He was, I don't know, 50 years old, and she was 20. And it didn't last, of course. I mean, it lasted a while. They were married for 10, 12, 13 years. But it was just kind of weird. I've been to Dorothy Stratton's grave several times, not because I wanted to see her specifically, but she's buried at Pierce Brothers Westwood Memorial Cemetery in Los Angeles, and it's sort of the cemetery for A-list Hollywood stars. And she's got quite the monument there that he paid for. She was supposed to have been the love of his life. But you know, besides his directorial triumphs, I thought he was brilliant in The Sopranos. I really did. Utterly convincing as a psychiatrist, as Tony's psychiatrist's psychiatrist. It really worked for him.
No, it did. And again, you know, he's somebody who had a long career. You know, I think of people like Sidney Lumet, for instance, who was a actor and a director, and kind of better known as a director at first. And then people realized, well, this guy can be good in certain roles. You know, Bogdanovich wouldn't have been great as one of Tony's crew, for instance. But Absolutely. I agree. But that's true with every actor. You know, every actor who's good in some things, not good in others. And it's a matter of casting them right. But two luminaries, and Sidney Poitier, you know, they just opened a film school at I think it's the University of Arizona. It's a college in Arizona, and they named it after him. They just dedicated it recently, virtually, the Sidney Poitier School of Filmmaking. And they did that because Lilies of the Field, his first big breakthrough role, was shot in Arizona. Did you know that?
I did not know that. I did not know that. I didn't know they shot much of anything in Arizona.
Well, yeah, they did that at the time. Saul, say again, please. Okay. So I can see me. So just so Saul knows, I can see me, but I can't see John. Okay.
Okay.
So there we go. John, talk about something. Let me try to fix this. One sec.
Okay. Yeah. You know, there's another thing too. The breaking news from this afternoon is the three defendants in the Ahmaud Arbery case were sentenced. And you know, everybody's going on the TV talk shows saying they're not surprised at the sentence. I'm surprised at the sentence. The father and son got life without parole, actually life plus 20 years without parole. And the neighbor who was driving the pickup truck got life, but with parole. So his comes to 30 to life. Frankly, I'm surprised it was that harsh because it wasn't a premeditated murder. But what a lot of the talking heads are saying is that it's because none of them ever showed any remorse, and that even in the closing arguments and in the pre-sentencing soliloquies, there was no expression of remorse. And I just simply don't understand why you wouldn't express remorse in a situation like this where, you know, if you really, really say you're sorry and convince the judge that you're sorry and that you overreacted, it could be the difference between dying in a steel bunk and dying, you know, in your own bed at home surrounded by your family.
Well, I'm always tricky on the remorse thing in general, and here's why. Because there have been people, I'm not saying it's the case here, but I am saying there have been cases where people didn't show remorse. And it's because they didn't do it, let's say, right?
Correct.
And there have been people who've been in prison for 30 years and turned out they were innocent. They were like, well, why didn't you just admit to it? And they said, I was not going to admit to something I didn't do. Does that make sense? So
sure. But there wasn't that question in this trial, though.
Well, there were things that were questionable in this trial. And my broad point, there absolutely were things. This guy had gone after them, had tried to take the gun from them. That had happened.
No, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. The question of remorse was the recommendations were that they should have said they were sorry for the way it played out. They shouldn't have chased him. They shouldn't have shot him, whatever. There's no question that they shot him. That's what the remorse should be over.
Well, so what we're getting into now is a matter, and it ties into what we were saying before, of acting. Because if, for instance, what was going on in the guy's head was this guy was running up trying to take the gun and was going to, could very well kill me. Let's say that's what's going on in his head. And let's say that he's not therefore remorseful exactly about it. He may feel a number of things. Should he act remorseful? I don't think so. This is why I don't like the remorse thing in general. I'd rather have the person.
But judges do like it. Judges do like it. And that's the difference sometimes between life without parole and life with parole.
But in some cases, the judges, it doesn't make any difference, right? There have been cases where people have shown remorse, and it hasn't mattered. And I'm not saying that would have been the case here. I'm not surprised about the verdicts because this was, in my opinion, very clearly a media trial. There was no way these guys were going to get a fair trial, nor do I think they did, in the same way that I don't think even Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty. Anybody, or Derek Chauvin, I don't think that was a fair trial. In any standard where you go, well, gee, there's all these look, there's still people about Kyle Rittenhouse. Somebody who's a professor in California recently said, Kyle Rittenhouse shot 2 black men. Now, again, there are myths about these stories. Even the case of Kyle Rittenhouse where he was found not guilty, people still have it as an injustice against black men. He was allowed to kill black people. And that's the atmosphere we live in. Now, the thing I'll point out, because I mentioned I've been doing my morning newscast all week, John. And I read a really good book on screenwriting once. It was on filmmaking. And they said, it's easy to sit there at your screenwriting program or at your typewriter, and you type in exterior, Alaska, dawn, right? That's easy to type, right?
Right.
And he said, the problem is if you type that and your film gets sold and it gets made, you're going to be waking up at 3 in the morning in 4-degree weather in Alaska. And you'd be thinking to yourself, I could have typed in exterior, Hawaii, sunset.
Right.
Right?
Right.
You see?
Sure.
You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
It can go either way. But they said the jobs numbers. I listened to NPR, then we'll go to a break. We'll get to Dean O'Brien. They said the jobs numbers, they expected 400,000 jobs. And I said this morning on my morning, said I'd be doing that. So I'm up at 4:30 in the morning listening to the news. Look at me, I'm a genius. But I said on the news this morning, I'll bet the number's lower, because for Trump, every time they'd say the job numbers are expected to be 200,000, they'd always be 300,000. With Biden, I said, I bet it goes the other way. Sure enough, we added like 100,000 jobs. So the premier from NPR was 400,000, but the reality was like 100,000, which is problematic. We'll talk more about that maybe later. Joining us now, after this short break, is photojournalist Dean O'Brien. Always love having Dean on the show on the last day of the show with John Kiriakou, which will reset. We'll talk about that later, too, because some people, even though we've talked about it, I'm still getting people saying, wait, John's leaving? Right? You see what I'm saying, John?
Yeah, that's funny.
And they don't know why. So we'll reset that again later.
Yep.
But let's take a short break right now, then we'll come back. We'll go to Dean O'Brien on The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show by any means necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back, 105.5 FM, AM 1390. I'm Lee Stranahan, joined by the John Kiriakou hand puppet. Yeah, I'm doing that. Yeah, sorry. But we have the actual John Kiriakou right here, right now. Hey, John, how you doing? I'm fine. How are you? That's good. That's good. That's a perfect voice for it, too. I bet you didn't know John did impressions. And we learned this on his last day as the co-host. We'll talk more about that later. Joining us now, great guest, someone I'm always fascinated by, anybody who's covering stuff on the ground and not just from a distance, you know what I mean, John, but also making great images. And Dean O'Brien is a great photographer. His photographs that he's taken in the Donbass, I've gone through, and I'm kind of picky about this stuff, John, but you've seen Dean's work.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
he's very good.
Fantastic work.
And covering something that it doesn't seem like a lot of people are covering, and maybe there's not. So I guess there's less competition. But hey, Dean, how you doing?
Yeah, fine, and thank you for having me back on.
Well, no, thanks
for joining us, Dean.
Well, so first off, you've done a lot of stuff in the Donbass region, in eastern Ukraine.
Yeah.
Now, but I understand you've been traveling lately. The past few times we've tried to get you on the show, you were other places. Do you want to talk a little bit about where your journeys have taken you in the past few months?
Yeah, I mean, recently I went to, I traveled to Serbia. I went there because there was, initially when the war started in eastern Ukraine, 300 Serbs volunteered to go and fight out there. So I was interested in what drove those individuals to travel out there and fight. So I went out there to interview a couple of fighters. Also in parts of Belgrade and Novi Sad, two different cities, they've got murals dedicated to leaders of the Donbass militia. So I wanted to talk to the person who paid for them, that arranged for them murals to be placed there. And it was good to speak to the Serbs and ask their opinion about what's going on, because the Serbs obviously felt like, I suppose, an empathy with the people of Donbass, because, as you may know, in the 90s, they came under some terrible shelling from NATO-backed forces. So they did see this kind of like parallel, if you like, with the people of Donbass.
Now, in Donbass, the Serbia situation, admittedly, is something I don't know much about it. John, do you know much about that situation? What do you know about the Serbs?
No, I don't. And in fact, when we got the email today from Rod telling us what the topics were, and he wrote under Dean's name that we've had 8 years of shelling in Donbass, I had no idea that there was 8 years of shelling in Donbass. I thought that once the initial hostilities had quieted, that was the end of it. I didn't realize that this was an ongoing situation.
No. Go ahead, Dean. Talk about that, because the situation has been very bad for 8 years would correspond to after the Maidan in 2014, right, which we're coming up on the 8-year anniversary of, right, Dean? So talk about what you learned there.
I mean, I've been traveling to Ukraine for 13 years now. So in 2014, I witnessed the West overthrowing a legally elected government, thus throwing Ukraine into a civil war that has been going on for 8 years. It's seen 14,000 people killed, which is rising by the day. Bizarrely enough, all the West talk about is Russian aggression, but Russia are lining up troops on their own border. They're not breaking any laws. They're just defending their own borders. But all we'll hear about is Russian aggression. Let's talk about Western aggression. The West that financed this coup that overthrew a legally elected government just so they can get their missiles right on Russia's doorstep.
Yeah, that's the bottom line right there.
Yeah,
and you think that's you do think that's the motivation, is they want to be able to get missiles, as you say, right on Russia's doorstep. Do you think that's what's driving the Donbass situation?
Yes, of course. They just continue, as Putin says, to keep poking the bear. It's what they do.
Yeah.
Now,
Lee, yesterday we were talking about Kazakhstan, and I was thinking about it after we were done, thinking, is it Muslim influenced? We were discussing on the show yesterday. Is it homegrown? And then I thought, you know what? It doesn't really matter what the origin is, because the Western interest in Kazakhstan right now is for there to be as much violence as possible and as prolonged as possible, because it bogs down Russian peacekeeping troops. It bogs down the Russians in Kazakhstan and could divert them, or divert their attention, or spread them a little thin vis-a-vis Ukraine. And, it seems to me that that's something that we ought to be looking for when we talk about Western aggression.
You know, I agree with that, Dean. In Donbass, how much? The only reason I mentioned the homegrown aspect, John, is because if you're going to start a fight, it makes sense to start it with the aggressive elements in the country because they're there already. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So before you bring in people. So in Ukraine, what was it like before the Maidan in that part of eastern Ukraine, the Donbass, Donetsk region? What was it like there before that, Dean?
Okay, well, in the East, they've always spoke Russian. They've always been proud of their Lenin monuments, their Soviet mosaics. It's always felt very Russian when you were there, but it always felt very Russian in Ukraine anyway, just more so in the East. But I always found it very friendly. They always saw themselves ethnically, culturally as Russian. In the build-up to 2014, there was the rise of the far right. You'd got Korpus, you've got Pravy Sector, which is translates to right sector. You had various different nationalist far-right groups. They were then trying to stop people speaking Russian, trying to change the store signs, the road names. You know, if you've got like Gagarin Avenue, they wanted those kind of things changing. There was a slow build-up to this. And then obviously when the laws got passed, when Maidan happened, it just changed instantly. It was a total anti-Russian thing that happened, and we're where we are today. It's I just don't know how this is going to end.
Hey, but tell us a little bit about. I'm sorry, Lee. Go ahead.
No. All I was going to ask was the anti-Russian elements there. Those do go back to the old splits, the Banderaites, right? I mean that anti-Russian stuff goes back in some ways centuries, right? An element of it, but you're saying it's been exacerbated by the situation, correct?
Yeah, of course, because what happened was, and this is a strange thing, and it seems like a contradiction, but what happens is you still get a lot of the far right marching in Kiev, Sieg Heiling. You'll see policemen on the street with swastika tattoos directing the traffic. This is the norm in Ukraine. It's been the norm in Ukraine for years. Now, what people in Ukraine say, because President Zelensky is Jewish, now what they say is, how can there be Nazis in Ukraine if our president is Jewish? Well, I'll tell you how. What happened was, to stage the coup initially, and to overthrow the legally elected government, the then president, they got into bed with the far right. The far right were the muscle. They've got the power, they've got the people to get on the streets. They were a big driving force to help overthrow the elected government. Now, what happened was, once that elected government changed, Zelensky kept in with the far right. And I know this is quite hard for people in the West to handle because they see the Jewish thing and the Nazi thing as a very black and white area, but it's not. In Ukraine, it's a very grey area. Zelensky has kept in with the far right. For him, they were a big help when the conflict first started. Ukrainian soldiers, they didn't really have a very good army, and they couldn't cope with the rebels. The far right came to their aid, the government's aid in Ukraine. And to be honest, when they did try and shut up Pravy Sector and people like that, they weren't going to go away. They were like, no, we were the people that got you here. We're staying. And this is why they've been allowed a certain amount of power in Ukraine still.
Yeah, tell us a little bit, if you could, about the positions of neighboring countries. You know, as this problem gets more and more serious, as we're looking at prospects for violence, what about the Belarusians, the Romanians, the Moldovans, the Poles, those countries around Ukraine that, you know, in the event of hostilities could be dragged in a way, perhaps, let's say, having to handle a refugee problem or having their economies impacted? Where do they stand on this?
Politically, Poland, all the bordering
Romania
countries.
Or NATO.
Yeah. So they will take the the Western side. That's what they'll do. But then again, they will take the collateral damage of that also, because if they, and this is what happens when the West invade these countries, you know, what happens is people go, yeah, go in there, sort out these countries in the Middle East. Then in the next breath, the people here are saying, why are all these refugees coming here? And what I say is, well, if you didn't go there and bomb the shit out of their houses, you know, you wouldn't be having them then having to come here. And this is what happens. It happens all the time. We go to these countries, we bomb them, we create refugees, and in the next breath then the civilians here are saying, why are refugees coming here? The government need to be answerable for this.
Now, and Dean, I got to point out that here in the land of the free, the home of the brave, if you say the word you said that's a synonym for poop, we could get in trouble. So you got to watch that because we are on the radio. But
okay, sorry about.
Not your. I think. Can we say shite? By the way.
Yeah.
Saul?
Of course we can.
Saul?
Of course.
No, we can't. We can't. So forget I said that. I didn't say that. Poop. I can say poop all day, right, Saul?
Right.
I can talk poop all day too. But Dean, you know, I mentioned this in the show before. There's a guy, David Duke. He's a former Klan leader. He's a well-known white nationalist in America. And someone sent me a broadcast he did recently where he said a lot of young white nationalists are going over to Ukraine because they want to fight with Ukraine against Russia. And again, he's one of those guys who, you know what I'm saying, John? When David Duke says that, the media should pay attention, but they're not going to. Have you seen any evidence of people coming from out of Ukraine to join with the Nazis, effectively?
Oh, good question.
In Ukraine. Have you ever seen that, Dean?
Back in 2014, there was quite a large number of Europeans and Americans that went to fight with Ukrainian militia units. Apparently, from what I've been told of lately, they're not accepting people from abroad now. But back in the early days, back in 2014, 15, it was a big thing. You of course had a couple of American fighters as well who went to fight for the other side. They went to fight for the pro-Russians.
That's interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And again, it's stuff I've heard continuously, because you mentioned groups like Pravi Sector, Right Sector, who are literally, John, that's who's in charge of the military in Donbass. And look, I've said this before, I'll say it again. The U.S., for a long time, going back to Uncle Louis, going back to Nicole Lebed, was supporting Nazi collaborating war criminals because they were initially in the 50s when the CIA was supporting Nicole Lebed. It's because they were anti-communist. Now it's just they're anti-Russian, right? But that's been going on in the U.S. for, you know, a long time, since the end of World War II. And so we have that history, but that's why you'll get someone like Joe Biden out there talking about opposing the people doing the Tiki Torch March in Charlottesville, which I'm opposed to too, but I also oppose the people doing the Tiki Torch marches on January 1st in Ukraine. Now, we have not had you on, Dean, since there have been talk of greater Russian aggression as troop buildup. We talked about, it seemed like the troops are in Yelnya. What have you seen about this new tension between Russia and Ukraine since you're there on the ground? What have you seen?
Well, at the moment, I'm back in the UK now anyway, but I'm working closely with correspondents on the ground, and there are no Russian troops in Donbass. Russian troops, as we know, it's no big secret, they have been on alert on their own border, but that's within their own rights. But Ukraine have been pulling in massive forces on the Ukrainian side of Donbass. And obviously this is backed by NATO forces. The US have been sending over loads of military aid there, weapons. So And they've sent over these Javelin anti-tank missiles as well. So the US have been providing a lot of military support to Ukrainian forces.
Mm-hmm. I have a question too. I happen to be Greek Orthodox, and there's been a great controversy in the church over the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Should it be an independent church, or should it fall under the auspices of the Russian church? Should it fall under the auspices of the Patriarchate in Constantinople? Has religion played any role in this? Because you've got a very strong Russian Orthodox Church, a very strong, at least in the region, Ukrainian Orthodox Church. They're at loggerheads now. What role has that had in this conflict?
Well, both sides are Orthodox. You'll see both sort of the militia units on both sides with Orthodox crosses, wearing Orthodox symbols. And you will find mainly on the separatist side as well. When I was over there, although they're very religious, they're very tolerant of other religions as well. There have been Muslim volunteers there, and they all kind of all seem to get on. But they do follow their Orthodox faith on both sides, from what I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Dean, the other thing I've heard that's going on with this tension, and you said there's a lot of Ukrainian troops now on the border there. I've heard they're also enlisting. They did a story on NPR, John, where they're talking about the citizens of Ukraine they're enlisting to fight, and how they're showing like women. They're training squadrons of women who are putting down their brooms and picking up rifles. Literally, they were selling it like that. And I was like, is that good? Is that a good thing? So have you seen that the Ukrainians are trying to get citizens to fight as well, Dean? Have you seen that?
Yeah, they are. I mean, they've had a push for a long time for getting citizens getting involved and with various volunteer units. But I think from what I read last week, it was kind of like official that they're getting women to sign up. It's quite strange, actually, because in Donbass, on the other side of the separatists, the women were some of the first people to come forward to volunteer. And obviously, you've got to remember on that side of the fence, they're unpaid roles. So on the Ukrainian side, if the women kind of enroll, they're being paid to fight, basically. On the Donbass side, women that are housewives and that took up roles as militants. Because they believed they were fighting for their land and their heritage, and they still do. There are a lot of female fighters on the Donbass side, but on the Ukrainian side, this is kind of like a fairly new thing.
Mm-hmm. Is there any chance of domestic tensions in Ukraine similar to what we're seeing in Kazakhstan right now? Are there any domestic problems that the president should be worried about? Something that might worsen the problems that he's already facing?
Well, I mean, you have to remember there's still a large percentage of people that live in government-controlled Ukraine that are probably, I dare say, secretly pro-Russian. So they can't speak out, obviously, because of what's happening, but they're still very, especially in places like Odessa, Mariupol, Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, all these places that were under rebel control, and they got seized by Ukrainian forces. Those citizens there don't change their views. They're still very pro-Russian. So at any point they could turn. Now in the center of Kiev, a lot of people want this war to end. Now President Zelensky will not sit down with the militia leaders on the other side in Donbass. This is why we can't get to a peace agreement. He will not sit down and get to a peace agreement. So that won't change until they get a new president. And that's the crux of it. So people in Kiev that want peace know that they'll never get it whilst President Zelensky is in power.
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting that Zelensky, again, because I remember when Zelensky was running, and again, he was running against a guy, Poroshenko, who was massively unpopular. At one point, the least popular leader in the world, John. That's who we put in place there. A guy who had a 6% approval rating. So, you know,
right.
A Netflix comedian has a good chance. Dean, in the last few minutes here, we only have a couple minutes left. what do you think the number one thing currently that people get wrong about this story in the UK or in America, people in the West get wrong about it? Dean?
What people get wrong about this is that they think that Russia have invaded Ukraine. They haven't. I heard these rumors, so I traveled there. If you go to Donbass, there are no Russian soldiers there. There are, however, local militants who wave the Russian flag, wear camouflage uniforms, but they're not Russian uniforms. They're just mismatched what militia would wear. So the other thing is, anytime there's a bomb going off or somebody killed, people say, oh, yeah, those Russians have done it. They haven't. The majority of these killings are done from Western Ukrainian forces, but you'll never hear about this in Western media, very rarely. And that's what they get wrong. They believe this is Russian aggression. It's not. This is Western aggression that's happening in eastern Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be frustrating for you, who knows what's going on from being there on the ground. Everything I've seen from my research corresponds with what you're saying, but I can't imagine the frustration having been there. And a lot of your photos, let's just say you do great work, but you're showing a bleak, bad situation. So does that ever get, the weirdness of that ever get to you, where you're making what you know, you're a great photographer, so you know what a good image is. But then you look at what the image is and you go, this is a good image, but it's horrible that it's a good image of a child in terror or whatever. You know what I'm saying, Dean?
Yeah, I mean, but this is why I'm out there doing what I do. You know, I have to take these images, and it's to add context to the situation, to sort of show to people, like, look, you'll hear about America providing arms to forces in eastern Ukraine, Ukrainian armed forces, and I have to show where these missiles end up. They end up in people's homes. They end up making people homeless, and these are the homes of pensioners and women and children. So, it's something that has to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah, John. Any final questions for Dean before you?
The last question is one that I've asked other guests before, but is there any reason for us to be optimistic? Is there any, do you see any chances that this might begin to wind down, or the two sides could come to some sort of if not an agreement, some sort of an understanding?
No, it's been tried. I'll say it's been tried. They've tried to have ceasefires and this kind of thing, and it just doesn't work. It does not work. The only thing that is going to bring about peace is if the president of Ukraine, currently Zelensky, sits down and talks with the other side and they get an agreement. But he's refusing to do that. He's going to be in power for, I think it's a couple of 3 years yet. So unless there's a change of president, or, as luck would have it, if he got overthrown and a new president came into power that wanted to sit down with the rebels, then you could get a peace agreement and it would stop the killing on both sides. But this, you're not going to get a peace agreement while President Zelensky is in power. That's rock solid.
There we go. Dean O'Brien, fantastic appearance. Thanks so much for coming on. And again, John, I always love when we have someone like Dean on, because they really do know the situation. And
Absolutely.
I think I wish people would look into this themselves and make sure you look for Dean O'Brien on Twitter. You'll see a number of his photos there. Amazing work. And thanks so much to Dean O'Brien once again for coming on the show. When we come back, 45 minutes to take your calls. It's John Kiriaku's last day on The Backstory.
Every day we ask questions.
How is Facebook going to prevent suicides?
Well, do you see this as being a human rights violation?
Are the cows really stinking up the planet that much?
To move ideas forward.
A gravitational wave is a ripple in the fabric of space and time.
I don't think the launch of the satellite proves anything at all.
Where do good ideas come from? We connect with independent thinkers, hear their ideas, and create stimulating debates on real issues.
The Dow is in a correction. As I said, commodities across the globe are collapsing. Why is that the case? Because we are in a global recession. That is set to change because Iran has approximately about 50 million barrels, which it had put in storage during the height of the sanctions regime, and that's ready to be released as soon as possible.
Where is the money?
The super rich individuals and the world's biggest companies are able to hide money in tax havens.
Is there a solution to the crisis?
No, because I don't think anything useful has come out of any of the policy reform discussions with respect to financial reform.
They give us answers we aren't always prepared for.
What are the chances that the report would make the Israeli authorities to review their policies towards the Palestinians?
Oh, probably zero.
This recession will be even worse than it was in 2008.
But that would be the nasty way for it to happen, you know. But because of Guantanamo, the U.S. is no longer taking so many prisoners, so instead of taking prisoners, they kill people.
A lot of people think that he's now unelectable and a bad leader.
Wow, that's just so much information to take in.
Pay attention, there'll be a test on this later.
Taking notes.
Welcome to the show.
Wow, this is crazy. We're definitely talking sci-fi over here. From 20 years ago, people would never have believed this. Crazy times we're living in.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around this story. This is a fantastic story.
Yes, it is a fantastic story, and it's a worldwide problem.
Welcome to the party.
And we are back on the backstory. Once again, thanks to Dean O'Brien. Great appearance by Dean. Now, one of the things I've learned, John, hosting shows about 5 years here on Radio Sputnik, is that sometimes, no matter how often you say something, people don't get it. Now, part of it, I'm not blaming anyone. Part of it is no one can listen to all of the, the only one I know, and he's paid to, Saul, listens to every show we do, right?
There you go. That's right.
And we got to, it's not a hobby. So I understand why most people, and whenever I have friends, we had Jen calling yesterday, and I'll sometimes say to Jen, did you hear the show today? And she'll say no, then she'll say, oh, sorry. And I'm like, you never have to say you're sorry. Because I don't expect my friends to listen to the show. Does that make sense?
I don't expect my friends to listen to it. And, I'll tell you, I'll make a confession here, Lee. In the 4.5 years I've been with Sputnik, I've never actually listened to any show that I've ever done or any show I've ever been on. I just have never gotten around to it.
Yeah, I don't listen much. I've said this before. I don't listen to like anything. Sometimes people say, did you hear Han? No, I didn't. Did I hear Tucker? Nope. I get little clips of things occasionally, and that's it. But one of the things I've learned is, so I'm not blaming anyone, is that there's some things, John, no matter how many times we tell people that we have every federal holiday off at Sputnik.
Right.
When we have federal holiday, we have Martin Luther King Day next Monday, not this coming Monday, but next.
That's right.
It's coming right up. We're not going to be here. No one. Sputnik will not be broadcasting original programming that day. So by any means will not be on Political Misfits, your new show. And at every time, I've got to say that because every time people are baffled by it. Does that make sense? It's like,
yes.
It's like the goldfish.
I get text messages. I get text messages from listeners saying, hey, what's up? I can't find the show today. It's like, oh my God, how many times have we said it's a federal holiday?
But I'm saying, I understand we said it as many times as we said it, but the person wasn't listening those times, or they were distracted or whatever. So I never get, I'm not saying this out of any sense of frustration, but we've talked a number of times in the show that this is going to be your last week on the show. Now it's your last day. Technically, it's your last hour and 10 minutes as co-host of this show. And people send me messages. Wait, what's happening? John's leaving? Why is John leaving? So I thought we'd one more time. Why is John leaving? John, go ahead. Take it.
So with detail or without detail?
Yeah, as much detail as you want to give.
Sure. Well, this show has been a good match. It's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it. That's not it at all. But I'm involved. I have been involved for a long time in a very contentious, very ugly custody dispute. And we're going to trial in the coming weeks. I expect to win in that trial. And I have reason to believe that one of the things that was going to be used against me was that I work every day in the studio from 4 to 6 and would thus be unable to pick up the kids from school, get dinner on the table, help with homework. I don't get home till 7. So at the same time, coincidentally, our friend Bob Schlehuber was leaving the show Political Misfits, and there was an opening there. That show runs from 12 to 2, and I said it would be certainly helpful to me, extraordinarily helpful to me, to switch to that earlier time slot. So I can drop the kids off at school, and they go to 3 different schools, which is kind of a pain. Then go into the office, into the studio, do my writing, do the show from 12 to 2, leave and pick up the kids, and the timing is perfect. Our boss, Mindia Gavashelli, who is really one of the most flexible people I've ever worked for, had no problem with it. I talked to Lee about it many weeks ago, and Michelle Whitty, and we all agreed that this was going to work out for everybody. So Austin Pelly, who was going to replace Bob Schlehuber, will come to replace me, and I'll take Bob Schlehuber's old slot.
And starting on Monday, it will be Austin Pelly in the studio, and I'll have new graphics that say Austin Pelly. So, you know, he's not sitting around going, luckily it's easy to do that. And we're looking forward to working with Austin. Now, let me ask you, let me run a divorce scenario by you, because I've talked about some of this before, and I got to say something. I'm a little disappointed. It seems like I haven't raised my kids properly. And let me explain. I got a message from one of my sons today, not the one who's the co-host of Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Shane and I get along fairly well. But another son of mine, maybe who you sometimes see around the office, maybe. But I'm just saying, it was like I've been talking to Shane, and the part that I've talked about is, remember a few weeks ago or a couple months ago, I was like, do I get my kids Christmas presents? Remember?
Yes.
And I decided I would get them Christmas presents. And then I talked recently that I was getting record players for my older sons and for my younger son. So I was talking to Shane about that. Shane, well, you'd think so. But here comes the part where apparently I'm not raising my children right. So I was talking to Shane this morning. He's been a little under the weather. Anyone who listens to Fault Lines, he's been out of the studio this week. He's going to be back on the weekend, I think. And I think he'll be back in the studio for Monday. But I sent a record player to his apartment. He's not there. But his roommate, his brother, Jack, is. I won't beat around the bush. I'm talking about Jack. So Jack sent me a note today. And he said, I understand you're sending presents for me or my mom or my sister. Do not send any of us presents. We will return them unopened. Do not. Now, here's what I'm saying. I raised them wrong. I'm going to tell everybody something. I want to be very clear about this. And tell me if you agree or not. My worst enemy can send me a present. That's my point. Like, why would you turn down? And I said to him, and this is a bit, I guess, maybe jerky on my part, but I said, well, you sure showed me. Because I'm like, and I said to Shane immediately, I said, well, more stuff for you. And Shane laughed. He got the joke. Why? Sorry, you're not hurting my feelings by you not taking a gift from me. All you're not getting is something, and I'll give it to someone else. Am I wrong? Or am I taking this
you're not
wrong?
wrong. You're not wrong, Lee. And there's something particularly mean-spirited about rejecting a present, especially from a parent. I'm sorry if that sounds judgmental, but yeah, that's not cool at all.
No, it is mean-spirited, and I'm going to use it as part of the parental alienation case that I'm building. And I said, oh, maybe I'll save the money that I would spend on a gift for you, and I'll just spend it on a lawyer. Maybe that's what I'll do.
Yeah, there you go.
And it is, the thing that's weird to me about it is I really don't see why it's mean-spirited, but honestly, it doesn't hurt me. I'm not hurt. I'm a little baffled by it. Like, why would you turn on a gift? I'm not even saying you owe me a big debt of gratitude for the gift. You follow me?
Right.
I'm just saying, it makes me, if I make a lot of money, which I plan to, I'm also going to make sure to invite the children who will go on vacations. And if you want to stay home and not go on a vacation, okay. Right? You see what I'm saying? Like,
oh, yeah. Yeah, I agree.
It's what? Yeah, go ahead. What were you saying?
I agree with you. I agree with you. You know, this whole idea of parental alienation, too, it's something that I've experienced as well. I know you and I have had a lot of offline conversations about this.
Yes, we have.
The thing is, and I've got another good friend who, it's an awful story, caught his wife sleeping with his best friend. His best friend. So not only did he lose his wife, but he lost his best friend since childhood at the same time. And talk about parental alienation. He has 3 kids. He has a special needs daughter, and she wrote him a letter, and she said, I think she's like 9 years old, and she wrote, "Dear Daddy, I don't love you. I don't like you. I don't want to ever see you anymore." And then she said what she wanted for Christmas. "I want a Barbie doll, and I want this. I love you. Love, Megan." Well, I mean, the poor kid's not equipped to even write a letter like that. She doesn't even understand what it is that she wrote. This is parental alienation. And while judges don't like to see it, they're very frequently very slow to react to it. Okay, that's point one. Point two is it may make the alienating parent feel like I'm going to use the word she, has a leg up for a while. But what it does in the end is it makes her kids hate her. It makes her kids hate her. And it causes problems, adjustment problems for kids. So the damage, I mean, thank God I don't have to deal with that problem. But I have friends and relatives who do. And in the end, it's going to come back and bite them.
And I agree. And I've seen that aspect. And I've even made that point. I'm like, how do you think, because my future ex-wife's older son hates her guts, like literally does not like her, yelled at her in front of the kids. And no one's figured out that, gee, maybe there's something I have nothing to do with there. Maybe there's something that I'm not involved, because it's my stepson, but I haven't lived with him for 10 years. So anyway, it's a rough situation, but I do think sometimes, and there's lots of, well, I'll talk about it after the break here on The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
We are live from America and just outside the Matrix. And I figured it out, John. No more puppet. It is time for the last hour of the co-host. By the way, he's not leaving the show because of the puppet. Of the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines, I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan.
And I'm former CIA officer John Kiriakou.
And this is The Backstory. We had Dean O'Brien in the first hour talking about the situation in Donbass. He's a photojournalist. Great segment with him. If you missed it, check it out. If you missed it, we also talked about, John did, why he's leaving. And it's the truth, so it's got that advantage. Coming up this hour, the great Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst and VIP, veteran intelligence professional, to close out the last hour of John Kiriakou as the co-host of The Backstory. So, Aaron, I'll get to you in 1 second. Aaron's got a comment about Kazakhstan. I just want to finish up, because I do, one of the reasons I talk about personal stuff sometimes is, for me, I equate the personal stuff with the political stuff. I was actually talking to a friend of mine about this. You know what else I equate it to? Fiction. You and I talk about The Sopranos or The Godfather or movies all the time on the show. Often, it's easier to explain geopolitics by referencing a Sopranos episode. Does that make sense?
Oh, my gosh, yes.
And in the same way, I think sometimes some things, look, and they all have to do with the same thing. I believe it was Danny DeVito. I believe it's a David Mamet line. The problem with people is people. I think that was Mamet.
Yeah.
And the problem with people is people. That is the problem. And so
that is the problem.
Anything you can name, relationships, politics, the problem is people. It's that human beings have ways we act and react. For instance, greed, jealousy. Let's just take those two, right? They show up in marriages. They show up in friendships. They show up in work relationships. They show up in the UN. They show up between nations. They show up between kings and billionaires, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so the point I was making earlier is sometimes people do things to thinking they're hurting other people, and they don't see that all they're doing is hurting themselves or not even getting a benefit. Like I was saying, the joke I was making, I'll explain the joke because it's kind of dark humor. I was saying I didn't raise my son right because he should know, even if you hate someone, take the gift. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I sure do.
My worst enemy calls me up. He goes, I hate you, Lee, but I'm going to buy you a steak dinner. As long as I know I'm not going to get poisoned, I'll take the steak. You see what I'm saying?
I probably would too. Yeah.
Well, because I'd go, I don't know what they're up to. Maybe I don't like them any better. But you know what? I think what my son and wife and daughter are worried about is that they actually are worried that they might secretly kind of like me. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. I kind of get that too. Yes, I've alluded to the fact that someone to whom I used to be close and I are not on speaking terms. And a dear friend of mine said the other day, I have to say that I'm surprised she's been as hardcore as she's been. Like, there's been no give. There's been no second guessing. And when we first began our relationship, I said to her, I'm only going to ask you for one thing. Please don't cheat on me. It's the only thing that I ask is loyalty. That's it. And I didn't even get that. She once called me irrationally loyal. And I'm the most loyal person that I know. I'm the most loyal friend. I'll drop everything to run to the aid of a friend. And people who can just cast loyalty into the trash that's just something I've never been able to understand. My brain just can't process it.
Well, it's a complex topic, and I don't want to get into it now, and it's too deep to get into now. And maybe I'll get into it at some point. But I will say, the only disagreement that I have, John, is I think from the stories you've told me, and you've talked about it on the air, so I'm not telling any secrets, the worst loyal, I don't equate monogamy with loyalty, personally. I really don't. And that's a long-standing, and that's what I don't want to get off into, because it's an interesting topic, but not one you can resolve in 10 seconds. But I think the most disloyal thing you said your wife ever did was when the story you told on the air that she was reporting back on your meetings with your lawyers after you'd been arrested for espionage to the CIA.
Yes.
Right? Am I summing that up fairly?
That's exactly what she said under oath in court. Yes. Yes.
Right. And
she'd been reporting back on my activities to the CIA's Office of Security.
That, a lot of people can identify with a person cheated. A lot of people have gone through that. Whenever I say to people all the time, I say, whatever I'm going through for a divorce, John Kiriaku's had it worse. And they kind of chuckle, and I go, no, let me give an example. And because you've talked about it on the air, I'm not telling a secret. I tell that story that, John, you were even asked in court, was your wife a good wife? And you said yes. She was very loyal to me.
She was.
After I was arrested for espionage, right?
Right.
And then you found out she was reporting back to the CIA. Everyone I talked to, John, ready? Here comes. You might want to hold your ears. The sound they make is, oof. Like, it's like someone punched them in the gut. You know what I'm saying? No. They can't, they're like, oh, whoa. You know, people are just like, whoa.
Yeah,
and
that hurt.
It's got to. It's actually unfathomable. You follow me? Because
it is. It's crazy.
Most people of a certain age, if you say, well, he or she were cheating. I found out they were sleeping with whoever, my best friend even, right? It's not going to get a whoa reaction because everyone goes,
right.
Oh, everyone goes, oh, yeah. Let me tell you, me or my sister or whoever, right? But this one about your wife turning your meeting notes over to the CIA gets a whoa reaction every single time. So there we go. 202-521-1320. Aaron, I'm not sure where you're from, but you have a comment about Kazakhstan. Go ahead.
Yes, this is Aaron. I'm from Illinois, and I listen to you guys' show every day. John, I'm sorry you're leaving, but I'll listen to your show.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, and I want to say, before I get to my comment, which is a quick comment, I do want to say about your wife that that's terrible. I don't think it's a reflection on you, John, and, and so don't feel bad about that. But
I appreciate
it. John, do you feel bad that your wife turned you into the CIA? The notes? Do you feel bad?
Disappointed, but I don't feel like, I mean, this is way more a reflection on her than it is on me. So I'm actually cool with it.
Because if you felt bad at all, I would talk you off that ledge, John. I'd go, dude, do not feel bad about that. I'm just saying. There we go. I didn't think you did, though. Go ahead, Aaron.
No.
Okay, thanks, guys. So my comment has to do with Kazakhstan, and I was reading Craig Murray, who was a fantastic writer, and he was friends with WikiLeaks, and he used to be the diplomat to Uzbekistan, I think. He published today I'm sure you guys are familiar with his writing, which took a contrary position to this, what most people have been saying about this issue in Kazakhstan, where he is saying that he doesn't believe that the USA or Victoria Nuland or the CIA has much to do with this at all. And so I was wondering if you guys if you were familiar with that piece he published today, or maybe if you could ask his colleague, Ray McGovern, who I think he's pretty close with, his position. Yeah,
he is.
Because I'm seeing, I'm kind of getting different messages. He's writing that, but then if you read, for example, The Moon of Alabama or other things,
right,
they're pretty convinced that it is the United States. So I just wonder if you guys have any position on that or how to reconcile that. And that's my
that is a great couple of questions, important couple of questions. And like I've said about Ukraine, I know so little about the region. It was not my area of specialty, that I've got to trust people who are smarter than I am on these issues. Craig Murray's a friend of mine. I think he's a brilliant writer. I think he's a bona fide hero for what he did for human rights in Uzbekistan. It cost him his job and later cost him his freedom. He just got out of jail, a month or two ago? But that is something absolutely we should bring up with Ray McGovern in the second half hour. I think Ray could probably walk us through the different positions here. I really don't know the answer to the question, but I sure would like to ask.
And let me tell you, my thinking at this point is I'm open to a number of possibilities. But one of them, here's what I'm going to say. I don't rule out the fact that the CIA, State Department could be involved. Does that make sense? I don't say, no, there's no way that would happen. I can think of scenarios by which that would make perfect sense. But when I listened to the interview, it was a great interview on Fault Lines yesterday with Mark Sloboda, who was on with us yesterday. When Mark was on in the morning, and he said one of their demands was to cease relations with Russia. You follow me?
It's crazy. Crazy. Never happened.
I thought, but I thought to myself, well, who would ask for that? And with the other Islamist stuff that got mentioned, I'm like, well, wait a second. Since some of the Islamist fighters, they're Wahhabist Salafi fighters who were joining with the Islamic State in Syria, they might view, in other words, what I'm saying is there's a number of people who have problems with Russia, and they're not all the same. And if you're, for instance, the Islamic State, you don't like Russia because they were supporting Assad, right?
Right.
Does that make sense? But
yes,
if you're the U.S., you don't like Russia. I think it's financial, okay? But there's a variety of motivations. So what I'll say is I don't know, but I'm open to a number of things. And the reason I brought up the Islamic connection that Mark Sloboda pointed out was the things that he'd mentioned, the request that like the polygamy thing, that is a little, John, that's a little bizarre, right? I mean,
I think it's plenty bizarre, yes. The polygamy thing, I mean, if that's true, we have no reason to believe that it's not. The polygamy thing would be a dead giveaway for Islamist intervention. Yes.
Right. Yes. But by the way, F. Scott Fitzgerald said the sign of a first-rate mind is the ability to keep two contradictory ideas in your head at once. Islamist involvement does not preclude CIA involvement. I'm not saying it's binary. In fact,
that's right.
Because the U.S., for instance, when I researched this a little bit, I could see that the Saudis had funded some of the Islamists in Kazakhstan. And anyone can look that up and find those stories. Well, the U.S. has a close relationship with the Saudis, right?
That's right. Very close.
So I'm saying that it's not contradictory, but I'm at a point now where if someone asks me, what's going on. The short answer, I don't know. And we will talk to Ray McGovern about it. But that's kind of the method. Does that method seem solid, John, at least? I'm not, because I don't have a conclusion.
No, I don't have a conclusion either. And like I say, you know, this is one of those opportunities to ask people who are smarter than we are on these issues. We've had Mark Sloboda, we've got Ray McGovern today, we had Dean a few minutes ago. So, you
Scott Ritter.
with these guys and their expertise, we'll be able to at least piece together a scenario.
A lot of times what I do is I just rule out, we got Tarif coming up. Then who's after Tarif, Saul? Remind me. Mark? Gregory in D.C. after Tarif. But so we'll get to you in 1 second. But one of the things I do, John, is first principles. I ask myself, what do I know for sure? Right? And what can I rule out? And there are, even in confusing situations, there are things you can say, I know this for sure. So for instance, if someone said, there's no way the United States would ever do something like that because we believe in freedom and democracy and we would never intervene in another country's affairs. If someone said that to me, right?
Yeah, you'd laugh, and then after you finish laughing, you would set them straight.
And I'd say, I just go, so in other words, there are some things that we know people are capable of because they've done them. You follow me? And I think it's helpful to go, okay. And by the way, also, there are some things there's no proof of. And we get into this with the COVID thing sometimes. I sort of was making this point the other day, John. I was saying, like, a lot of people go, they're using the vaccine to create a fascist dictatorship. And I don't think they need a vaccine. I can't think of a single example of where they said, we want to have a fascist dictatorship. Let's do it with a vaccine. But we have had fascist dictatorships, right? So I'm not saying it's not possible, but I'm saying I can't think of any examples of it. Do you see? Does that make sense?
Nor can I. Yes, it is possible. But yeah, I don't know of any examples.
Right. So then I go, okay, on the other hand, let me make a less conspiratorial scenario. Are there people who take advantage, for instance, of situations? Yes. Are there drug companies that take advantage of the fact that AIDS is getting a lot of press, so they come up with treatments that are very expensive? Yes, that's entirely possible. But that doesn't mean that the drug company created the disease. You follow me?
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
And is it possible? I guess so, but you need to prove that to me. You follow me? And often when I ask people to prove that, they drop back to, well, no, but it's possible. And I go, well, that's all you got? Is that it's conceivable? Because they don't even mean possible. They mean conceivable. They can imagine it.
Right.
Or it's sort of like a movie they saw starring Robert Redford in the 70s or something. You see what I'm saying? And they go, well, but it happened here. And I go, well, that's a movie. So I'm just saying there's some things, I don't rule them out, but some people are so quick to jump to them. Oh, but it could be this. And then they act like it could be is carte blanche.
Right.
To say that's what's happening, and it's not. 202-521-1320, our friend Tarif. Tarif, your last time on with John Kiriakou as co-host of The Backstory. Tarif, what's on your mind?
Thank you for taking my call, gentlemen. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange. Then the NIH need to be properly investigated. John Kiriakou, what you got to do, bro, you got to go to Thailand and get your woman from Thailand, bro. That's what you have to do. Okay. I was listening to.
Got that? Wait, John may have left. John, are you still on?
I'm still here.
I thought you could be in Thailand. But go ahead, Tarif.
Who wouldn't want to be in Thailand? Although the one time I went to Thailand, I caught typhoid fever and almost died. So I'm a little bit reluctant.
That is a hot story. Okay, Tarif, go ahead.
Oh, I try to put my 2 cents in there. But anyway, I was listening to Duran Ellis McCuris and his little crew. It was talking about what's going on in Kazakhstan because it's so important. From what I understand, the intelligence service trying to track down who was responsible for that. And there's reports that's coming out that suggested saying that the U.S. was interfering in that region, part of that world. So she today called the president of Kazakhstan, giving him full support, and happy that he stepped in to fight against those terrorists that was causing problems and killing police officers, and destroying property and stuff like that. So you got the CSTO, Russia, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, and Armenia stepped in with troops to help quiet down the situation. And now you got she called in, helping them out, like with more support and other supports that they're going to help them out with. It might not be military, but it could be some other things to make them stronger, make the economy stronger or something like that. But so that right there, the Russia had just strengthened itself in that region, and also China as well. So when January 10th come around, U.S., Britain, whatever, NATO won't have too much to go after Russia about, because they got Russia stronger in that region. So we're going to see what's going to happen January 10th coming up, Yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
No, great comment, Tarif. And we would obviously love to get Alexander Mercouris on the show, and I'm sure we will soon. Not that John will be here, but, But he could have...
Alexander's one of my favorite guests. He always has been. We used to have him on Loud and Clear all the time, too.
And I'm sure he'll be on Political Misfits. And it's probably easier because it's not so late.
Right, right. For him, it's going to be like 5, 6 o'clock. Yeah, that works.
He'll skip having a late tea or something like that. But we'd love to have Alex on the show. The Kazakhstan thing, what I know for sure is that people on the ground have said it seemed like groups of people showed up that made the situation more violent. And the headlines in the news today, the president of Kazakhstan is saying that the military can shoot on sight, no warning. So
yeah, that was big news. That was big news today. And then, I made a point of watching BBC broadcast news just to see their coverage of this. And they said that, as might be expected, there was an immediate drop in violence. Immediate. Yeah,
well, see, so this is, again, not to be, and we'll get to Gregory and DC in 1 second, but authoritarianism sometimes works. I don't know how else to put it. But the fact,
look at Switzerland, or look at Singapore rather.
And right, and I've seen some people say peacekeepers in quotes, and I'm like, I think they are going in to be peacekeepers. You had government buildings being set on fire, the mayor's house being ransacked, right? You had people being shot and killed, police and protesters. And I think the Russian-led force is in there literally to chill out the kids. Does that make sense? Sometimes if you turn around and threaten the kids for yelling in the back seat, does that make sense, Sean? If your kids are, everyone who's a parent knows this.
Oh, yeah.
If your kids are freaking out and now starting to throw stuff in the back seat, you love your kids. But if you're just kind of like, hey, guys, come on.
Yeah.
Right?
My dad used to say, don't make me pull over.
Right.
And
that gets their attention. So you can be shot on sight. You know what?
Yes, sir.
While on one hand, that's a level of authoritarianism that I don't like the sound of. I can't argue with the results. Does that make sense? So I'm reticent to give it full-fledged endorsement, but it's interesting, and it's a broader question. You bring up Singapore. You know what? Some people are more comfortable with authoritarianism. And I know this is hard.
Some
and
people
again, right. And you know what? Because some people would rather have order and, cleanliness. Some people would not. I'll put it like this. If they're going to rough you up if you throw gum on the street, right?
Right.
On one hand, I oppose that. On the other hand, their streets aren't going to look like ours in America, right?
Right.
And so I'm not taking a side of it. I'm just laying out the realistic thing. The streets I've heard in Singapore are very neat. Have you ever been there, John?
Yeah, I spent 9 days in Singapore back in 2009. There is not a cleaner city or country anywhere on the planet than Singapore.
And so there you go. And I can see why some people would like that. But again, it comes at a cost. But there you go. That's why I like the fact that you can leave countries if you don't like them. I think the ability to be able to leave is important.
And that's how Singapore is, actually, because if you don't like living, with so many rules, by all means, you're welcome to leave if you'd like. Famously during the Clinton administration, there was a kid from Ohio whose parents were stationed in Singapore. His dad worked for a bank or an insurance company or something like that. And this kid was a troublemaker. And so he went out one night to smash car windows. And he got caught. And his sentence was to be flogged. And what they do is, they pull your pants and your underwear down and they beat you with a rattan cane. And it leaves scars, and it's intensely painful. President Clinton called the president of Singapore, I think it was Lee Kuan Yew at the time, saying, don't do this. And the Singaporeans said, look, he violated our laws. He's a punk. He was just going around the neighborhood smashing car windows. He's got to pay a price. And so they gave him a good hearty beating. And then what they do after they beat you is they make you shake the hand of the guy beating you, right? It's like this traditional thing. And so later his parents moved back to Ohio, and he got arrested in Ohio for, drugs and just being an all-around punk. And so I remember seeing an interview with his father, and he said, the kid has problems, and he said, you can't blame everything on Singapore. And so, things the way they are in Singapore, they're heavy-handed, they're authoritarian, but they work. Chewing gum is illegal. You can be flogged for chewing gum because people spit gum out on the sidewalk. And if you want to have nice, clean sidewalks, you can't have chewing gum. That's just one of the many, many rules and laws that they have in Singapore. For me personally, I loved the place. I thought it was amazing. Like I say, aside from maybe Beverly Hills, I've never seen a place so clean and so orderly in my entire life.
And there we go. Now, Saul, let me just call this. What we'll do is I'm going to bring on Gregory. We'll finish out the phone call, then I'll call for the end. So we're going to go a little past the bottom of the hour. Does that make sense, Saul? And then we'll bring on Ray McGovern after that. So Gregory in D.C., thanks for waiting. What's on your mind?
I just wanted to thank John. We're going to miss you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, I've been listening to you since you've been on. It's great. You guys have great guests.
We've been very fortunate.
Gregory, great call. Thanks for calling.
Sure.
But don't forget, John's gone but not forgotten, and not really gone. He's going down to Political Misfits right here on Radio Sputnik, noon to 2 with Michelle Witte, and that's going to be a great show. And we're excited to have Austin Pelley coming on this show. And I think this will be a different show, but I think people will like it. Right, John? You concur?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. It'll be fun.
And right after this break, the last half hour of the week with John Kiriakou and two CIA guys. I got to watch out here. Former CIA analyst Ray McGovern. Right after this on The Backstory.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda. But we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
We are back, final half hour with John Kiriakou as the co-host of The Backstory. If that confuses you, we discussed this like an hour ago, so go back and check it out. Everything's fine. Don't worry. But it's last half hour of the great John Kiriakou as the co-host of this show. He's moving down to Political Misfits at noon to 2, temporarily moving down. Austin Pelley will be joining this show on Monday. There we go. Joining us now as the final guest of the week and the final guest with John. Great job again, our intrepid producer, Rod.
Yes.
Former CIA analyst. Yeah, go ahead, John.
I was so happy to see Ray McGovern's name in the email today. I couldn't have asked for a better guest to help me end my tenure with the show. Welcome, Ray.
Yeah.
Thank you
Ray.
very much. Glad to be with you.
Well, so Ray, before we start, talk about VIPs, because I said we have two VIPs on. Talk about veteran intelligence professionals. Tell people if they're not familiar with it, they should be. Most people are, I think, in our audience. But if they're not familiar with it, tell them about that organization and the role you played in it historically and now. Ray?
Yeah, I was one of the five that set it up. It was 2 months before Colin Powell lied before the UN about weapons of mass destruction. And, we have been around for a while. We had watched all the pre-UN lying. And so we decided that since we're kind of voices in the desert, that we would band together and at least create some kind of mechanism where people would recognize who we were. Our first actual product was that same day when Powell spoke. And we told the president, because that's what we were used to doing, writing for the president, that Powell certainly did make a good case for war, that the evidence was flawed. And we ended up with these words, Mr. President, we strongly suggest that you broaden the circle of your advisors beyond those clearly bent on a war for which we see no compelling reason and from which we believe the consequences are likely to be catastrophic, end quote. Now, we take no joy in the fact that we were right about that. We're one of the few people that were right, but that was almost 20 years ago now. And we're still slogging at it and still trying to tell the truth. So John Kiriakou, of course, is one of our stalwarts. And we've just really had a good collegial time, reminding one another that the first principle of discipleship is to support one another and to be there to compare notes with and to say, yeah, you're not crazy when you want to say or you want to write that George Bush, Dick Cheney, Barack Obama, or Joe Biden are lying.
Ray, just as an aside, I have to tell you, I was just sickened yesterday when I saw coverage of Dick Cheney arriving in the House of Representatives at the invitation of his daughter and receiving an ovation from the Democrats in the House of Representatives.
Yeah.
How times have changed, huh?
Sickening is the word. You know, I was sort of proud of my service as a Russian analyst for 27 years before I retired. But when I saw the head of the CIA, Porter Goss at this time, go down with Dick Cheney to Senator McCain's office and plead for an exemption. Please, please let the CIA keep torturing people. Don't include the CIA in that legislation that forbids that. No, we need to torture people. That's when I decided I had to sever whatever was left of my relationship with the agency. The only way I thought to do that was to throw back the, you're probably familiar with it, John, the big medallion they give you for exceptional service. After you retire, I threw it back at the head of the House Intelligence Committee in Congress, and I said, I don't want to be associated anyway, however remotely, with an agency involved in torture. And you know chapter and verse about that. I could only watch that from the outside, but I was appalled and sickened. Sickened is exactly the right word.
Well, and the fact that, like you say, John, we had Dick Cheney there, you know, as part of the protest against January 6th, I think says a lot about the narrative on January 6th and who's behind it. I'm not surprised that Cheney was there because, as I've said, it's the same people who are pushing Russiagate for much the same reason. But let's turn to other headlines, Ray. We've been talking about Kazakhstan all week. What's your take? You must have been watching it somewhat. Do you have any experience in Kazakhstan from when you were in the CIA? And if not, what's your take on what you see going on right now, Ray McGovern?
Well, I have to ask you to say that word more distinctly. Cognizant?
I see. Don't ask me to say that word because am I saying it right or wrong, John?
Yeah, Kazakhstan.
Oh, Kazakhstan. Okay. Yeah. Well, again, if I were a Russian, I would be really, really suspicious that this might be one of these color revolutions, however remote Kazakhstan seems from the U.S., and it is remote. The thing is that the longest land border in the world is the almost 5,000 mile, so it's 7,500 kilometer border between Kazakhstan and Russia. And that's, you know, a favorite route for terrorists to come through there. So this is one major consideration that the Russians have. The other is that Kazakhstan, I think, leads the world in uranium production. It's got a lot of other pretty good assets like oil and other industries. So I would be really, really careful. If I were a Russian, I would send 200 troops in there as a peacekeepers or whatever, and make sure that this is not one of those situations that either Western intelligence services started or that they could jump on and exploit, like the one in Syria. That started out quite differently, but it was taken over by, quote, moderate, end quote, Syrians that we support, moderate terrorists that we supported.
The modern Al-Qaeda, the moderate one wing of the Salafi movement. But so, John, before I throw it to you, let me just say that, that border, why doesn't Putin build a wall? Go ahead, John.
I want to ask you, Ray, it's a question from one of our listeners who called in half an hour ago. Craig Murray published something earlier today on Kazakhstan. And Craig as probably better than anybody else. I want to ask your opinion on his piece. He says that the narrative on the right in Kazakhstan is that Putin is looking to annex the country, or at least the majority ethnic Russian areas in the north. This is utter nonsense, he says. The narrative on the left is that the CIA is attempting to instigate another color revolution and put a puppet regime into Nur-Sultan, the capital of Kazakhstan. He says this is also utter nonsense. Can you give us your thoughts about Craig's piece, if you read it, or about the overall view? And also something that we talked about yesterday was perhaps the involvement of Islamists in this uprising.
Well, it's real early. I think it's 2 days old, the uprising. Yes, so we'll have to kind of see how things sort out. I know Craig well. He's a very close friend, and he's a recipient of the Sam Adams Award for Integrity and Intelligence, just as you are, John. Now, what I could say about Craig is, among other laudable assets, he happened to be UK ambassador to Uzbekistan, right next door. So he knows the area really well. I think he's quite right in saying that the right and the left are going to try to exploit this. But when he talks about those who say, this is you're trying to depose this and depose the current government and, the color revolution, all that, that's fully what I would expect, but it's not coming. In other words, it's kind of the mouse that didn't roar, or the dog that didn't bark is better analogy. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say I would expect Jen Psaki and all those other propagandists to be jumping all over this and saying, no, look what the Russians are doing now, look what they're... And they're not. Now, they might tomorrow, but they're not today. And that argues for me as an indication that Washington is trying to be really serious for once in approaching these negotiations that begin on Monday in Geneva between our Deputy Secretary of State and Sergei Ryabkov, the Russian Deputy Secretary of State. These are crucial negotiations. If they end up badly, it's going to be really bad, not only for Europe, but for the world at large. So far, Biden has been keeping the propaganda stuff down. He's made some conciliatory gestures. First and foremost, he's apparently pledged that he won't deploy offensive missile systems in Ukraine. Now, did you see that in the New York Times?
Oh, I did see that in the New York Times. We were comparing this yesterday on the show to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Could it be compared to the Cuban Missile Crisis? And this seems to be the administration's efforts to make it unlike the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, it is very similar to the Cuban Missile Crisis, but that one's on the record. And in Putin, we're dealing with a statesman. I say that word advisedly. He's circumspect, and in my view, his primary objective is to safeguard the Russian people from being destroyed. There's no way you can really be sure that you can safeguard your own people if you're going to toy around with an attack, with surgical strikes or whatever on bases going into Ukraine or elsewhere in the eastern part of NATO these days. So what I'm thinking is that he is looking for a deal where the U.S. will agree to at least some of his stipulations, all of which, not all of which, but most of which make good sense, because NATO did promise not to move eastward, not 1 inch, as you know, and that promise was violated. Interestingly, the Chinese also had a promise, right? They had a promise there was a one China policy, and that Taiwan does not be treated as an... So you have two promises, and the reason I mention China here is because the discussion between President Xi and President Putin on the 15th of December ended up with the spokesman saying that the relationship between China and Russia in closeness and practicality is more than the relationship between allies. That's big. That means you want to fool around in the core interests, as the Chinese say, of Russia? Well, Russia has always defended our core interests, says Xi. So you better be a little bit circumspect about being naive that we will just stand aside if you act in a threatening way to Russia's core interests. This is really big. And one reason it's really big is because President Biden humiliated himself in June at that person-to-person meeting with Putin in Geneva by saying, we know, President Putin, we know that you're being squeezed by China. We know you have a really long border and that China's trying to be the most powerful country. That we know that you have to worry about that. Well, I don't know where he got that. Probably from Winkin, Blinken, and Nod or somebody, But it was 180 degrees away from the case. And so between June 16th and when they spoke next, December 15th, Biden got educated about the real realities here, and that what the Russians used to call, the Soviets used to call the correlation of forces, where this triangular relationship between the U.S., Russia, and China was sort of equilateral. Well, it's still maybe a equilateral triangle, but it's 2 against 1 now, and Biden is slowly becoming able to realize that, and listening to people like Bill Burns, the head of the CIA, who's been around for a while, and telling Blinken and Jake Sullivan, the rest of the wigs here, you've disgraced me. I'm going to talk to the Russians now, and we're going to see what kind of deal we can craft before it all falls apart. NATO is getting really nervous as well, and duly so, because if the Russians put in medium-range ballistic missiles that will give NATO just 5 minutes warning before they're used, and that's what Putin has threatened to do, then all their cities are at risk in a way that has not been the case since 1987, when the INF Treaty took place.
That's right.
Now, Ray, while we get you on the show, we want to talk about Assange and those issues and a little more about Russia and Ukraine. But since we've got you on, I want you to tell a story. You were at there was this famous dinner for the anniversary of RT that General Flynn was at. And you, sir, stood up and called out at the dinner, I believe, General Flynn. And a lot of people don't know that story. And there's a lot of people on the right who are General Flynn fans. I've never quite understood it, John. I'll be honest. But there's a lot of people on the left.
I don't either. He's done nothing for the right.
Well, and a lot of people on the left call him out because he was at that dinner. That's not the problem. Right. Ray pointed out the problem with General Flynn. So, Ray, do you mind telling that story? You know the story I'm talking about, of course. It was you involved in it. But can you tell us that one? Because I thought it was great.
Sure. Well, that was a dinner that we kind of didn't know was going to happen until all the security arrangements were made. There were a lot of people there, including Gorbachev. Putin walked in, and there was one sort of table toward the front that Flynn was put at, together with Jill Stein and a couple other people. But it was not actually at that locale that I challenged Flynn. It was the day when he was making this big speech. I asked the first question. I said, General Flynn, while you were head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, there were all these reports that Bashar al-Assad of Syria had poisoned his own people with sarin gas outside of Damascus in a place called Ghouta. That was always flimsy. Actually, most of us believe now that was a false flag attack. They wanted to get us the U.S. to attack Syria, just as we attacked Iraq. But what can you tell us the real deal on that? And he looked at his shoes and then he said, well, you know, Ray, that was sort of complicated. I don't really remember. When was what were you talking? I said, well, it was actually in August 10th of 2013. You probably remember. Well, no, I can't remember. No, and everybody's sort of laughing, you know, because he was head of DIA. And he might have come to the right conclusion because we had some high-level military who were supporting us in our surmise at the time, later confirmed that that was a false flag attack and that John Kerry was lying through his teeth when he said just 10 days later that it was Bashar al-Assad and Bashar al-Assad. It was Bashar al-Assad who did this.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I again, that's the kind of thing, John. If someone hates the deep state, they should hate the false flag attacks being pushed by, in this case, an administration they didn't agree with. Kerry, right, was part of the Obama administration.
Absolutely.
But yet, Flynn, supposedly a Republican, that a lot of people, you know, from the Trump base seem to like, he utterly failed in that story. You see why I had Ray tell. Also, Ray can tell a good story. But you see why I brought it up, John?
Absolutely. And, you know, I hadn't heard that story before. Ray, I've said a million times, I was invited to that dinner, and Judge Leonie Brinkema from the Eastern District of Virginia would not allow me to attend it. And so I missed the opportunity. I missed the opportunity to meet Putin. I missed the opportunity to meet Gorbachev. Jesse Ventura was there with Jill Stein and with you, and it would have been so much fun. It probably would have caused me all kinds of headaches, but I think it would have been a good time.
Let's really make John feel bad. How was the food, and was there vodka? Just tell him. Be honest, Ray.
Well, as soon as I saw Mikhail Gorbachev, the food didn't matter, not even the vodka. He's one of my heroes. He pretty much, he's maligned in Russia because he failed to get a signature on that promise not to move NATO 1 inch to the east. The Russians don't like him at all. That was one mistake he made. But, you know, otherwise, he freed Russia from that terrible dictatorial regime. So once I saw him, and then once I saw Putin walk in, now here's the scene. We kind of were told that Putin was coming. The Russian chorus, army chorus, was singing, and then there's a little whispering in the back, and in walks this rather small fellow with one other rather large fellow. And that's a security detail, right?
Wow.
And it just walks in.
Wow.
No, there's no not like crap at all. And he walks up and he sits at the table with Jill Stein and with Flynn and the rest. They couldn't communicate with each other because there was nobody who spoke Russian. I wish I was at that table. I could have helped a little bit, but it was all very makeshift. terms of where they were sitting and all that stuff, but they got the photos and they can make a big deal out of it. But he stayed for about 10 minutes, got up, made a nice little speech praising Archie on its 20th anniversary, I think it was, and then walked down. The big guy with him came with him, and they walked down this central thing, and he waved hello to Gorbachev, and he didn't wave hello to me, but I waved to him, and he left. So the difference in what what we have become accustomed to with this, this royal sort of thing, was very stark. And, maybe it's my proletarian background, but, I could identify much more with a president of the people who didn't have to surround himself with 100 security details and a band to play when he came into a meeting.
That's right.
Now, I'm not making any promises, Ray, but listen, when they have the big Sputnik extravaganza, Sputnik 25 or whatever they call it, I'm making all this up, John, we will try to get you on the list, Ray, because Ray, we'd be great to have there, wouldn't he? And we'll get you at the table with Putin.
That'd be so much fun. So much fun.
So that's just a little hint.
Yeah, put me at that table with Putin, and I'll interpret for whoever wants to hear what he says.
I can't even say Kazakhstan right, so I'll need an interpreter. John?
We've got about 3 minutes left. We can't let you go without asking about Julian Assange. There's sort of a lull in reporting because we're awaiting the appeal, of course, to the British Supreme Court. But can you at least tell us a little bit about Julian's mood, his condition? Have you spoken to people who've been in touch with him the last few days or the last week?
Well, Craig Murray is my best source for how Julian is doing. It's a very painful subject for me, John, because he's a friend of mine. He's a good friend. Yeah. Even though there's a difference in ages. I used to visit him when he was at the embassy there.
Yes.
They are killing him slowly. They're doing it deliberately. And the worst thing is that they advertised this in communications that were ironically intercepted and published by WikiLeaks. This is the former deputy head of State Department Security saying, he's a terrorist. We ought to put his head in a very full toilet bowl, drown him. We ought to do this, we ought to do that. And we're getting an indictment on him. And it's just really chilling. The depths to which these so-called security people have descended. So it's a terrible thing. I feel for his wife and his 2 little boys. They're killing slowly, and if he dies in prison, so much the better. That will relieve a bunch of headaches from people who pretend they speak for justice.
Well, and as I pointed out, I don't think there's any advantage. I think they've got Assange where they want him right now, and I don't think they want to make him a martyr. So let's hope for the best in this situation. Ray McGovern, thanks so much for joining us. Fantastic last guest with John Kiriakou. By the way, John, I got word that the big Sputnik 25 extravaganza will be at the Siberia Denny's, and who knew?
Yes,
that there was even a Denny's in Siberia, but apparently, that's what
you learn something new every day.
Because I make up new stuff every day. But, John, I got to say, in the final minutes that we got left, it has been an absolute pleasure. One of the best experiences I've ever had as a journalist has been working with you
thank you, Lee.
On the Backstory.
The pleasure's all mine. You've been a great friend. I look forward to working with you, to continuing to work with you. Thanks to all the listeners and the YouTube viewers. This has been a lot of fun. Even if we've disagreed, it's been in good humor and in a spirit of friendship. So thanks for everything you've done.
No, and I appreciate that too. And again, it's never gotten personal one time. Everyone knows John and I talk. When we talk off the air, it's always great. And John, love working with you. Best of luck. Michelle is getting a great co-host on Political Misfits. We'll be back with Austin Pelley on Monday here on the best damn talk show in the world in this time slot, The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Good evening. Welcome to the Critical Hour. We're coming to you from the capital of the United States of America, Washington, D.C., here on Radio Sputnik. I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I'm joined here by my co-host, political analyst Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
For the next 2 hours, we will explore and analyze the salient news stories that are impacting the global village in which we live. In the midst of the U.S. trying its best to antagonize Russia, RT has a piece, Sanction Ukraine Over Nazi Glorification. Russia and Europe must unify in response to resurgence of far-right ideology in Ukraine, Moscow says. Now this, of course, on the heels of the U.S. and 2 other countries voting against the